Welcome to 10 Years Too Late, the podcast where we pick a random subject and we talk about how a decade makes a difference. Also, there's three of us. Little joke I heard recently. What do you call three white guys? A podcast. Anyway, I'm Joel. I'm Joel.
I'm Brett.
I'm Chase.
And we have a special guest with us today. Kevin O'Hara is with us. And he kind of fits in the age category with Brett.
Yeah, an old man, right?
Not quite.
Yeah.
He's still got more muscles than all of us probably
That's
combined.
True.
So
That's true.
Probably combined,
That's the only old man joke I can say before he gets angry. I'm sitting next to him.
Right.
Yeah, that's a compliment.
Yeah.
It doesn't fit in the old man.
Remember
I could easily whip Chase's ass.
Yeah.
So.
That's what it is.
Remember when you used to say to them when they'd make fun of you, like, "Oh yeah," and you'd say, "I got some free boxing lessons for you."
Somebody's about to get a free boxing lesson, right?
You know what?
Which they constantly made fun of me. So
Yeah, so we've known Kevin for over 10 years.
Yeah. So in some way you fit in. Yeah.
Absolutely.
We've known you for 10 years.
Yeah.
right.
Time flies. Good. I mean, speaking of the 10 years, all right, let's start with this today. If you had to, and this may be super serious, I don't know, we'll see where this goes. If you had to say something to yourself 10 years ago, what would that be?
Me first?
Yeah, go for it.
I would tell my 41-year-old self, whatever you do, don't go to West Coast Church. I'm just kidding.
Don't become friends with Kevin O'Hara.
Yeah.
God hates him, and
God hates him.
he'll drag you down. No, that's not true. But I don't really know what I would tell myself. I just wanted to get that joke out before anybody else did it.
Yeah. Because they were all thinking it.
Yeah. A little background, West Coast Church was a place where really all of us were at one point.
Yeah. Right.
Together.
Yeah.
That's it, though?
And it was.
That's it.
Yeah.
I think
don't
for
know.
me, if I could go back, I would just tell myself, whatever you're about to do, don't.
Yeah.
Don't do it.
Don't do
It's
it.
the best advice.
No, I think I spent my 20s trying to figure out what it is that I actually wanted to do. I think most 20-year-olds do.
Mm-hmm.
But now that I'm like going into the 30s, I'm like, I don't know, just pick a couple things that you really liked and just do those. Don't do all of them, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm following. I don't think the jack of all trades thing is a bad thing to have, but I definitely have it. And now I'm like, what am I going to do for the rest of my life?
Oh, I know what I would have done. If you're done. That was rude.
Okay, that was done. All right, now.
I would convince myself I shouldn't interrupt people.
Yeah.
I would have started school sooner.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would have gone back to school sooner.
Yeah.
So you would have traveled back in time and said, go to school.
Yeah.
Lazy ass.
You're going to end up
Go
doing
get
this
in
anyway. And so, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, just thinking about it, there's all kinds of, advice that I would give myself, but it's the old saying, hindsight's 20/20. So knowing what has happened over the past 10 years, and knowing some of the crap I've gone through, I mean, yeah, there's definitely some very specific advice. One piece would be get out of ministry now. For years and years, I was, I wanted to go back and get my PhD, which now I'm finally on the track of doing that because I had to get out of ministry because of, all sorts of reasons. And, I'm in the middle of a divorce and all of that. But, and I'm definitely, it's been hard, but I can definitely see where I'm going to be much happier doing that. And so now I just wish, 10 years ago, so it's the same thing. Yeah, go ahead and get out now, and go to school. But, I was sitting here trying to think, well, but what about, are there like certain principles that you didn't follow that you should have followed? And I'm not sure about that. It's life is pretty random, and there's just no way to predict things. It's so, it's not like, I could have said to my 42-year-old self, hey, just think this way, see the world this way, and everything will be okay if you act on it. It just doesn't work that way,
Yeah.
So
It'd be nice if it did.
right.
I think you kind of stole one of mine a little bit, Chase, was the
Just say no to everything that you're about to do.
very
Yeah.
close. So I have two. One is
Man, you really screwed up.
yeah. Pretty much you'd be doing nothing right now.
Right.
You'd be sitting in a room staring at the wall.
Yeah.
One though is stop being so hard on yourself. It's you're never going to be perfect. That's my probably number one thing I
Yeah.
would say. Whether I would have listened to myself, I wouldn't have. But then the second one is that it's very similar to that. It's something like you're not going to be successful at everything. You can't have everything. You can't be successful at everything at one time.
Right.
That's just you. If you're going to say yes to one thing, you're going to say no to something else.
Yeah.
So pick the thing or two or three things. It seems to me to be about, I don't know, 2 to 3 things you can really pour your effort and time
Yeah.
into at one time.
Yeah, that's right.
And be successful at. The other things you're just going to be either mediocre or you're just not really going to. I don't know. That's probably what.
I feel like I joke about saying no to everything, but to bottle it all in, what I would really probably say to myself 10 years ago is study patience, because I felt like it was that worry of what am I supposed to do, and I haven't put a ton of energy into this one thing, or do I want to build houses? Do I want to flip houses? I don't know. And I get really impatient and I go back and forth. But lately I've been learning, like within patience, I've been able to find out what do I really enjoy doing, because I do it long enough and I tell myself, be patient, see if you actually like this. Don't just give up.
Yeah.
I need to work on my patience and discipline, I think, a little more. So
That would be
Yeah.
It's good stuff.
Yeah.
A little bit of background, Kevin. Tell us a little bit about yourself in a few minutes.
Yeah.
So people know who you are and where you're coming from.
Well, I, when I was a young man, I got into a rock band. I was a bad student in high school. I was the kind of dude that had long hair, smoked weed, and hung out with the bad kids, and I got into a band and everything. And at some point along the way, I decided that I wanted to be a rock star, right? And so I discovered that some of the really great guitar players, Randy Rhoads in particular, for Ozzy Osbourne, he had classical training, right? And he was an awesome guitar player. And so I got it in my head that maybe I should go to college for music, and that would make me this great guitar player. So I did that. That was probably a really good decision, because then when I went to college, I discovered there was all sorts of things I was interested in. And so once you're in college, you don't have to take the stuff that in high school or whatever. And I took different courses that I was interested in, discovered that I was academically talented, and along the way decided I didn't want to be a musician. I took an astronomy class. I was always a sci-fi buff, and then really got turned on to like cosmology and physics. And so this like really bad kid who smoked weed and got bad grades and dropped out of high school in the 10th grade. Okay, just quit going.
So you ended up getting your GED there.
Yeah, I got my GED.
What did your parents say about that?
Well, my dad, he was a raging alcoholic, and I mean, he was, oddly though, he was also a loving father. But I don't know, my parents were pretty good at just saying, well, things will work out. He'll find his way in life, and so that's kind of what happened. So anyway, I ended up going to college, and I took this class, and out of the blue, I decided I wanted to become a physicist. And
From rock star,
right? Yeah, right. But the thing is I had no idea. What's funny about that is I had no clue. I picked up a book by Stephen Hawking. It's Brief History of Time. It was his bestseller, and at the time I was an atheist. Okay, and as I read his book, he kept mentioning God in the book. Now he did it somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but at the same time he was kind of a little serious, because he was describing the universe and how it seems to be ordered you know, and designed and that kind of thing. And so that really piqued my curiosity. My father was a minister and a raging alcoholic. So, you know, so you're getting a snapshot of, you know, how messed up I am. Right. You know,
was he Catholic?
Yeah, no, he was a
Lutheran.
Pentecostal teacher,
Pentecostal.
which made it even worse, you know.
If he was Catholic, that would mean that he
Yeah.
had a miraculous birth.
Yeah. That's right.
Because his dad
So,
was married.
That's true. Well,
Yeah. So anyway, so then, you know,
When
I
my
had
father
no
gave
idea.
birth to me.
it's getting really weird.
Yeah.
All right, that's enough time we have.
Yeah,
for today.
that's right. So anyway, I had no idea how much math was involved. None, you know. And so when I found that out, I mean, I had done nothing in high school. I had never even done any algebra, you know, and so I literally had to start like at the lowest possible level at the community college I was going to. The first 2 math classes I took, I didn't even get credit for them. I just had to take them as prerequisites.
Me too.
Yeah, and
That's where I discovered, however, the opposite, that I am
you
not
did not have a talent for math, right? So in doing that, though, I discovered I had real talent for math. I mean, I just went from the most basic math class you could take, and just boom, 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 up through calculus, differential equation, just one right after another, flew through it, you know, and loved it. And then took physics and all that, and I did love it. And so, but then along the way, I became convinced. I became a believer in God again, right? And I also met my wife in a strip bar, and she was a stripper, and because I lived in strip bars at the time, that I only dated strippers. That's a true story, okay? But we met, and through a very bizarre twist of fate, you know, one night she kind of had this cathartic moment where her life wasn't going well and she wasn't happy, and we got the Bible out, you know, and I kind of knew it because my father was a minister,
right.
and so I kind of pointed her to these passages, you know, in Matthew, and she started reading, just bawling her eyes out, reading, and just like cutting her to the very core of her soul. And I'm watching this, and it's like really affecting me too. You know, I was like overwhelmed by it. And so, long story short, I was like kind of in love with her, or at least in that moment I was. I was actually going to break up with her, and then that happened, and all of a sudden I felt like I was in love with her, like right then. You know, it was bizarre. And so
Messiah complex.
Yeah, maybe. That right. I had to save her, right? Mm-hmm. So she literally prayed and became a Christian right there. And the really cool story about that was that she had run away. You guys know her, Tommy Lane. You know, all these guys know her. Mm-hmm. She had run away from home when she was 14 years old, and she really never went back. So she was on her own since she was 14. Jeez. And she had been stripping, you know, for quite a few years, and she had no skills other than that, you know, and that's how she made money. And she said to me, she said, I know it's not God's will for me to do that, so I'm just never going to do it again. And from that night to this, she never stepped foot in a strip bar ever again, and neither did I, which was bizarre. That, you know, so, you know,
like true conversion.
It was even more of a miracle.
Experience.
Yeah, that's right. That was probably a bigger miracle than her not going back, you know. Right. And so anyway, so we were married, and I decided to go into ministry. So then I was in this world where that I was really in love with math and science and working on my degree, but also wanted to go into ministry. And so I became a pastor. I just started a church because I definitely didn't want to go to seminary. And I was trying to balance those two worlds and use what I had learned in the one world to inform the other. You know, and I felt like it really needed that. You know, religion really, really needed to be clued in from the things that science had learned, and over the years, that honestly was just bashing your head against the wall. It was in many ways just completely futile. I mean, just nobody wanted to hear it. You know, and some of the insanity still exists today. You know, young Earth creationists and people like that. You know, so anyway, I met Brett in 2007. He was starting a church. We joined together, and things were going good for a while. And then I think it was 2013, right? We had like this church split. You know, there were these recovery people coming, and the Sunday morning people didn't like them. And anyway, we had a church split. And so after that, things went downhill. It was really hard to rebuild it. But we spent years, I guess, you know, trying to trying to salvage it. And that's why I think,
years.
yeah, right. And then we ended up coming to Suncoast, long story short. And then I ended up going through a divorce. So after 25 years. And so now I'm finally, back in school, just finishing my PhD in math and or physics. Haven't decided which one it's going to be. And just want to work in that field. I'm teaching at a college right now, and I'm just enjoying that way more now. And so that's why I say I wish that I would have gotten out of ministry back when I was, 42. I just would have said to Brett, hey, you know what? This isn't going to work for us. Let's get the hell out now,
Yeah. No, that's...
So...
Or you would have said, here, you can have these 10 people that are left.
Yeah, right. Well, but remember, 10 years ago, so that would have been, 2009, right? Things were actually going pretty good then.
Yeah.
So...
Well, okay, so in light of that, I think we could all relate to this to some extent, is why would you say to your... Because I can relate to that for sure, of this idea that... Because I did a similar thing where I was in ministry and trying to pursue a graphic design, build a design business on the side. And at some point, I made that same decision where I just said, I got to get out of ministry and I want to just pursue the business. And it seems like there's 1,000 reasons for that. But why would you have said that to yourself? Get out of ministry and pursue this.
Did somebody...
No, go ahead.
Well, it because, again, this is because of hindsight, which is always easy, it's just because I now have come to accept that, the church, as we know it, the evangelical church, they're just going to keep killing themselves, and religion in the last 10 years in this country has diminished radically, and the fastest growing demographic is basically the nuns. That's what they call them, because when they do, like the Pew researchers, when they, are the ones who say, I have no religious affiliation, that is the fastest growing demographic. And among young people, there's just virtually no allegiance to any kind of like religious thing. And it's not hard to see because, what happened was, before we had the internet, the church had authority because it was the church, it was part of society, and you just kind of didn't question it, and you didn't
there was
really
no way to verify that they were right or wrong.
Right, so, and so it was, you go back just 20 years, and it was really sacrilegious to say, I don't believe in Jesus, or I don't believe this Bible monk, But then the internet came around, and that allowed people to voice their doubts, but to do so anonymously, yet publicly.
Right.
Yes.
And so what happened was that, thinking people who had doubts all along began to realize that they weren't alone. And they could be anonymous and public. And so you had chat rooms and people began to really question, some of these theological, and they are silly theological ideas,
Right. And even they had the ability then to look back there was more historical records available to everyone.
Right, and that's the other thing that the internet allowed too. Not only could people start voicing their opinions anonymously without fear of castigation, but now that it also started to provide all of this information at your fingertips, and people started to see, oh my God, the idea that our planet is only 6,000 years old and it started with two people, Adam and Eve. That's just, it's ludicrous from a scientific perspective. And so everyone started questioning that and even got to the point where it's like, okay, this is ridiculous. Well, the church, instead of just saying, okay, yeah, you know what, we were full of ourselves and we should have been questioning ourselves a long time ago.
We call ourselves people of truth.
Right, that's right. They just dug their heels in, man. They just dug their heels in and just, no, this is what's true. Right now.
Honestly, that's really why the church that we had together, that's one of the main reasons that people left.
Yeah. It was definitely part of it.
We did a class on the book of Revelation.
No, I remember that.
And as soon as we wouldn't... the first night there were a bunch of people there.
Yeah.
And then we started talking like, look, this stuff is not to be taken literally. Okay.
Yeah.
They were out the door.
Yeah.
Well, and I see that. Why go to church if church isn't going to provide this religious framework for you to live your life, right? In other words, a better way to say that maybe is, there's a fear there that as soon as you start questioning this thing, it's a slippery slope argument, right?
Right.
As soon as you start questioning this thing, then what about this thing? And what about this next thing? And then, then I don't even know what to believe anymore.
Right.
But see, here's the odd thing.
Is that you don't really have permission in the church, in many churches, most evangelical churches. You don't really have permission to ask questions.
Yeah.
So you feel like you're going to go through the castigation anyway.
Castigation.
Yeah.
Is that like being castrated?
Anathema.
That's what I'm seeing every time.
Is that
like
you're going to have to go through castration no matter what?
Yeah.
Oh, no, not that.
No wonder West Coast didn't survive.
Right. Oh my God, we have to be castrated to go there.
like we don't understand why no one hung around.
Yeah.
Especially the men. They left really quickly.
Yeah.
So, you don't, if you feel like that's going to happen regardless, and unless you're willing to check your intelligence at the door before you go to church every Sunday, if you can't deal with that, then it's just better just to leave.
Yeah. But, here's what's interesting about that. The arena of human endeavor that has changed the world more than any other arena over the last 500 years, I mean, by far, is science. Especially in the 20th century. You look around, we're doing a podcast right now. Everything in our lives right now is a product of modern science. To the microphones we're using, to our cell phones, the computers we use, the planes we fly in, the cars we drive in, the clothes we wear, everything in our lives is a product of modern science.
The food we eat.
That's right. And how did they have that success? By questioning everything.
Yeah.
Because in questioning things, what happens, it's okay. This is that you were saying, what's a slippery slope? Well, once you start questioning this, then what happens? Well, what happens is you discover deeper truths. That's what happens.
Yes.
And so if you believe in God, a God who's anything like the God of the Holy Bible, then you wouldn't have to worry that you questioning things is somehow going to screw him up or make him scared, or whatever. And so this notion that you should just blindly accept and believe and hold on to it no matter what, that's sort of what God wants, and if you don't do that, well, then you're going to be deceived somehow. Well, in the arena of science, the opposite happened. We learned a lot more by questioning everything.
What's interesting too is when you look back in church history, the first 3 centuries of the church's history, people didn't care about being right or wrong versus another guy the way that they do today.
Right.
If the bishop over in Smyrna, Polycarp, I'm just thinking of him because his name always pops up. But if he doesn't agree exactly with me on my view of the atonement,
no one cares.
We're still brothers.
Yeah. Right.
Now they had an advantage in that they were running for their lives all the time
right.
too. But that does make a difference.
Right.
Yeah.
When they're going to die.
But as soon as the church didn't have that advantage, the advantage of possible martyrdom, and they were in the seat of power, all the political pressure, we entered what I call the age of the creed-centric age, where we have to have dogma. This is what we believe, and if you don't, then you are anathema. You're accursed. You're cast out.
You get castrated.
You get castrated, or worse, burnt at the stake or something. Yeah. So this is the history of the church.
Yeah.
So what was the point I wanted to make is, it's not like the early church didn't get hung up on this kind of stuff, but we've been so long in this creed-centric environment that to start questioning the Bible versus the facts of science seems wrong to them.
Well, and here's what's interesting. And this is right around the Nicene Creed. So right around the Nicene is when this happened. Okay, and so once
which would have been
325, and then like the completed update, it was like 381, I think. Yes. Right. So
which is not AD anymore. It's
CE, right, Common Era, yeah. So anyway. So the thing is what's ironic is the moment they started putting more emphasis on what we believe sort of theologically, I like to even think of it as theoretical, our theoretical beliefs. That's what theology is, our theoretical beliefs about God. Once that they started thinking that way, what's ironic is then over the next 1700 years, because the beliefs were so important, they also became politicized. They were
Legislated.
They legislated. They were put in. Beliefs came about because of what was most convenient. What people liked and what people didn't like, and the arguments, and whoever just had the most power
what
at the
would
time.
Control society
Right.
best.
That's right. And so what happened is finally today, now in the 21st century. Churches in general, evangelical churches, but really, all of them, we've come to this place where we literally have just ludicrous beliefs that did not exist in the first 3 centuries of the church.
Yeah, what's interesting you bring up, and I want to bring you into this in a minute, Chase, because I want to hear your perspective.
I'm taking this all in.
But I'm, you mentioned the charismatic church.
Yeah.
That's what I grew up in as well,
Right.
Pentecostal charismatic church. And it's interesting because Tara and I, my wife and I, talk about this a lot. It's almost like it's a different religion in and of itself. Some of the belief systems and the way that the language that they use isn't even really used in other churches.
Yeah,
especially when you get
it's
into
a little
the
unique.
Spiritual realm and the demonic and the the spiritual gifts and the all this sort of stuff. They have this whole sort of sub belief system. That doesn't even exist. It could almost be its own religion.
It almost could, yeah.
I'm reading this book. Have any of you guys read the book History of God?
No.
It's by, what is her name? I should. Is that something you can look up, Chris? Good book. It's a really good book. But anyway, she's basically talking about, it's kind of history meets anthropology meets, or religious history.
That does sound
it's a
good.
really good book. You'd love it. A lot of it wouldn't be new information to you, but the way she presents it's really good. And she talks about how basically religion through the ages one thing she says, it doesn't most of the time make logical sense, but people take on belief systems because they work to keep them out of despair.
Right.
Yes.
In other words, like if it worked for society to keep them from despair, we kept it, even if there's not a lot of logical sense behind it. And for some reason, the way she said that, just like, oh yeah. And she proves her point through the book. She goes through the 3 major religions, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity.
Yeah.
And she weaves the whole story about how many times it's changed and how we've changed our view of God so many times over the ages.
Well, that was Karl Marx's whole thing. He said, well, look, the church is just the opiate of the masses. But the problem with that is it's just keeping them, dull and they're not fighting back against the injustices of the oligarchies and the rich that are ruling them. And so that's all it was.
Yeah.
And
for him,
yeah. But he was, look, and I'll be called a heretic for this for sure by people in the church. But Karl Marx was not stupid.
No,
and he had some really, really brilliant ideas. I think the whole atheism thing. I think he went too far with that. I think he should have seen that for what it was. But yeah, he was right in a sense, because the belief systems at that point, that's kind of what they had become. Well, things suck now, but don't worry. In the afterlife, it'll be great.
Right. Karen Armstrong, by the way.
Okay.
It's a pretty well-known book.
Cool.
It was written in 94, so it's not a new book, but it's a really good book.
If you look at the beliefs of the first 3 centuries, and some of those guys, some of those dudes were brilliant, and many of them were the theologians were mostly Greek, and they were Greek philosophers, and they were very familiar with Greek philosophy, with Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, going all the way back, and they were brilliant dudes, and I feel like, if you study the things that they believed then, from there, if we could have just stayed on the right track, today where religion would be, I think where Christianity would be, is it would be the other pillar of society along with science. And it
would have been so much, it would have been allied with science.
It would have given
it would have promoted science.
It would have given not the answers that science couldn't give, but it would have given the balance in terms of beliefs we couldn't explain. So practices.
Yeah.
To me, the part of Christianity, or not even just Christianity, is the practices to connect with a divine God, divine essence, whatever, that gives you purpose or gives you kind of this meaning, even if you can't figure everything out.
Right.
Even questions where is this drive for meaning? It addresses things like that.
Right.
And that's where Karl Marx is thinking, in his atheism, or anyone else who takes that route, they just kind of drop that. At least many of them do.
Yeah.
Well, I think the other thing is what the church would have done, because this is the way they thought in the first 3 centuries, was, what evidence can I present for my beliefs that are not, it's not evidence that is empirical. So, and that's what science does. It always, in some way, comes back to empirical evidence, okay? Yeah. But there are just things that are not empirical, and that you cannot observe and you can't put in a lab or in a test tube, but
there's still evidence.
And we still question them.
Well,
and
like your conversion experience that you and Tommy Lynn had.
That's right.
I think I can point to many situations like that in my life where I've had this divine, otherworldly experience, God experience, and I can't. It was as real can be, and it made a huge transformation, defining moment in my life. But I can't tell you the empirical evidence. I might try to explain.
Well, there wouldn't. How would you measure? How do you measure love? How do you quantify it? How do you measure it? There is no way to do that. And in science, what we always do in science is, it's not, when we say empirical, what we really mean is shareable. It's like I can say, see for yourself. All you got to do is look through this telescope here. Look through this microscope. Do the math. Do it yourself. And we can measure it and we can quantify it. You can't do that with love and morality. But you question things like, okay, well, we evolved, and that evolution was survival of the fittest, which meant we're here today not because our great grandfather going back 1,000 generations was better at loving his neighbor. He was better at bashing his neighbor's head in with a rock and taking his food and women. That's evolution. So the question is why is our morality not aligned with that? Why do we think it's heroic for a young, virile firefighter to run into a burning building to save a little old lady? In fact, why don't we just think that's immoral to do that?
That's because of religion.
Well, but the thing is that religion arose from something inside of us that clung to that. Right. So the morality came first, and the question is where does that come from? That's called the moral
imperative.
Yeah, the moral imperative. Why do we have a morality that seems, in many ways, contradictory, not in all ways, but in many ways contradictory to the very evolutionary process that would have brought us about? Yeah. And so those are the kinds of things that religion would tackle and say, hey, there is an explanation for that. There's a model for that. It's the idea of a God who, we were created, but we were created in a way that we could resist him. We're sinners. So the story of the fall, we are these hairless apes that have these drives that are evil, but then there's like this spark of something else in us that's not like that. That's not biology.
So we're creating a story to explain the inner experience that we're having, and that's really what a lot of that is. Right? The Bible's continuing to explain the story over no question.
And the question is then does that model, combined with science, does that model, when you give all of it, including the things that are not empirical, which science can't really speak to, does that total model seem to explain reality better than one without God? In my opinion, yes. I think it does. And so that's why I'm a Christian. Even though I think that the institutional church has just totally lost it. And I think they're going to die. I think they're just, 50
it's just a matter of time.
Right, yeah.
And it'll shift probably. I'm going to come back to you, Chase, because you haven't said anything.
Well, no, I was about to say.
I know you've got something to say. You can't get a word in edgewise.
No, I know I've been taking this in. I grew up with a bunch of wacko pastors.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
No, I mean
that was us for the last 10 years, wasn't it?
Luckily I met Brett early on when I first started coming to church, and so when I would go to other churches, and I was kind of used to hearing them go back and forth on these topics. So going into other churches, I was like really open-minded to like a lot of things. I'm like, truth is truth, and I'm not going to be afraid of it, In fact, in the Bible it says, test me,
Yeah, right.
And so I'm not afraid of like diving in, but I was afraid to talk. And as we're going, I'm wondering, like, age-wise, is it harder for you guys to talk to people your own age about religious?
That's a good question.
Religious issues than like maybe
Yes.
you or I?
The answer to that is yes. But that's because the younger the generation, the more educated they are. That doesn't mean formally necessarily, but
Right.
they are, because of their access to information and their ability to use the technology that gives them that access, versus older generations like ours and older. They're just not as savvy with that stuff, and
they're set in their ways. It's
And
just,
they're
this is what I
they
believe
get
that's
set in
worked
their
for
ways,
me.
which is, I really can't relate to that. I mean, I'm sure that there are ways in which I've been set in my ways, but I never really could relate to just getting set in your ways, where you just accept
here's the thing,
your
though.
ideas about reality that you forged, in an age or in a time where you didn't have all the information you have today. How do you not change? I don't get it.
I get it. Here's what I've come to, because I deal, obviously, when you ask that question, it's when I'm talking to older people that are a little older than me. Yeah, it's a hard thing to talk about, even people my age, so I'm really right on the year where we switched from Gen X to millennial. By most measurements, I'm a millennial, but by some, I'm a Gen Xer. So it's, and I really do feel that, especially right now in my life, where I feel like I bridge the gap between those two. Not I personally, but it's just a weird place in that way.
You're the
but
second coming.
Yeah. Oh yeah, totally. But what I have come to is it's fear, and I have compassion for people now that I didn't used to have, because I think it's scary as hell to start deconstructing your faith. If you've been doing something for 40, 50, 60 years, and you start saying, wait, but that's not true, that it disassembles everything. You talk about, I was saying slippery slope before. The thing I say is, used to be, well, you're going to go down the slippery slope. Well, now I say, yeah, you got to go down the slippery slope. You got to go all the way to the bottom, and then you got to kind of hike back up and figure out where you actually want to live on the mountain. It's like skiing. You got to get all the way down.
You might fall down again.
Yeah, and you might go back. Yeah, exactly.
But just keep climbing the mountain, because it's not like the mysteries are they're all going to go away.
Right.
But
I think that certainty, that what Pete Enns wrote, that book, Sin of Certainty, that idea that certainty in this boundary, in this universe that I can predict and say, this is how the world works, this is how the universe works. When I die, this is what's going to happen. This is what I'm going to teach my kids. It's a story that's powerful, and it's a story, I think, that people literally survive on. And when you start taking that story away, it feels like a nightmare.
It's a giant paradigm shift. Yeah, definitely. That's scary. And I guess the reason that it's harder for me to relate to, I mean, I've definitely identified what you're saying, that people struggle because they love a sense of certainty, even if it's a bunch of bull crap.
Yeah. Even if it's a made up story.
Yeah. And people do it all the time. And I think the reason that it's hard for me to relate to is because I grew up in a home that was very open. Concerning philosophical or theological stuff. I mean, it was just very new age and open, So I became a Christian, just by researching stuff.
Ironically, so did I. Even though my father was a Pentecostal pastor, the one gift he gave me was the gift of thinking critically. He wasn't educated formally, but he read a lot, and he was a smart guy. And he never tried to get me to believe just bullshit. In fact, I remember once I was like 5 years old. We were riding in the car, and it occurred to me, it was around Christmas time, and it occurred to me, I thought to myself, how would Santa get, there's so many people in the world, how would he be able to get to all of them in one night? And that's a thought that a lot of people have, I'm like 5 years old, right? And so we're riding in the car, and I say that to my dad. I said, Dad, that seems like impossible. Like, there's no way Santa could go to all of them, I said, I don't know. Maybe that's like not true that he goes to everybody's house, He said, he said, and I said something like that, and I'll never forget, he like looked over at me sitting in the seat while I was driving, and he said, yeah. He said, sounds like a lot of bullshit, doesn't it, son? I'm like 5 years old. But, the cool thing about that was he allowed me, and then he sort of agreed with me in a way that, because that made me feel proud. It was like he was agreeing with me, like, you know what, that you're right. That sounds like bullshit to me, right? But it was almost like he said it in a way that was like he was just agreeing with me. Like I had thought of something that was like, yeah, that's a good thought. I think you're right. I'm gonna, which made me feel proud. And so he kind of always treated me that way.
You know what, son? You've convinced me.
Yeah.
Up until right now, I just had these doubts.
I thought Santa was.
Yeah. So I mean,
now I'm afraid.
Yeah. So
Christmas isn't going to come.
Right. So for me, thinking on my own was always something that he would like reward in terms of his response and everything. So for me, it was always, let's think about what's going on here.
Yeah, that was definitely true in my home too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a different experience. But okay, Chase, back to you.
What?
I keep putting you on the spot here now.
I'm comparing my experiences to.
Well, I'm wondering, because you asked us that question.
Yeah.
When you talk to essentially your generation, your peers, younger, is it even an issue, or when do you?
All right, so because I got involved in church, a lot of my circles that I hung out with were already Christian groups or circles, but they weren't the majority of people my age. I just hung out with kind of the church people.
Yeah, right.
And I think now that I'm older, I'm going out socializing more outside of church, go get a beer at a pub or downtown, or we're going to watch a show or something like that. So now I'm interacting with people who I don't know from church.
Did you know there's a whiskey bar downtown?
Yeah, it's awesome.
No, I didn't know that.
Jim took me there last week. Anyway, it's really good.
Yeah.
But like places like that, places that I probably wouldn't have gone to when I was a kid in high school.
You didn't go to the whiskey bar when you were in high school?
I didn't go to the whiskey bar. But I grew up with these guys, so it kept me with like an open mind of like, ask questions. If it doesn't make sense, it doesn't mean it's wrong. At first, you got to dive in. A lot of times I would hear something that was totally against, things that I've read or my opinions. And, these guys taught me, well, figure it out, dive in a little deeper instead of just like, no, that's heresy, and then walking away. So I started talking with people, and I found that, people are just looking for something tangible, like it's like, I don't really care if you're Christian or, you're Buddhist or whatever. They're looking for something meaningful. And I feel like a lot of Christians that were older than me were holding on to things that, they didn't.
Yeah.
They didn't. They were just rules and kind of, you can't do this. Well, why? I don't know.
You just can't.
And I'm like, oh well, I'm not gonna follow you into battle. If you don't know where you're going.
Yeah. So you'd say people are picking their practices maybe based upon what it means to them versus their Siri. No.
I could have swore I turned it off.
So people
That's what I say every podcast.
Yeah. That happened what did we get last one? Was it Amber?
Yeah, it happened with Larry too.
You know what I'm saying? Are people picking their belief systems based upon like you said, what it means to them versus what everybody else tells them? It's almost that internal choice.
I think at least for me personally, I'm just looking for wisdom.
No matter where it comes from. I'm
looking for wisdom, but I can tell, I can come up to a Bible scholar and tell this dude's not very wise. Or, just because it like the arrogance comes out, but it's more of like you were saying earlier, we have all this facts and science, and yet, and then we also have, most people have the Bible and religion on the other, and they're not coming together. And it's like, well, how do you tell this story tell it this way when we have facts that the earth is this many years range old, and things like that. And so I'm like, okay, well, if that guy's just kind of like sticking to something he can visibly see that's not true, then why would I credit anything else he's got to say?
Mm-hmm.
I'd rather go with the open-minded guy that is both like, here's what science says, here's what history says, here's what the Bible says, here's how beautifully they come together. That is wisdom to me, because I'm like, wow, that's much bigger picture of God.
Think about it this way. Instead of, well, that's what science says, let's just be honest and say, these are the facts that science has discovered. Facts. These are non-negotiable things. Okay, the age of the Earth is non-negotiable within a range. It's definitely not 6,000 years, as an example. Okay,
but it is flat.
But so then, good Lord.
And there's like a dome. Over the top.
Jesus. Good.
Those are the hardcore literalists right there, man. I mean, So, the question becomes, well, am I going to throw out the Bible? That's what a lot of people end up doing, as though there's no wisdom there. And that's a mistake. In my opinion, that's a mistake. Okay. Or other wisdom literatures. I might be called a heretic for this too, but I study religion, so I know what Buddhist texts say. I know what Hindu texts say. So a lot of it, there are tons of parallels. Okay. But am I going to take the facts that science has shown us about the creation and let that inform my interpretation of these wisdom texts? Or am I going to assume that the facts just aren't real? Well, they're facts. No, they're not. I mean,
that's what they
ludicrous.
do. I mean,
that ludicrous.
Right. I mean, there's people right now that if they listen to this podcast, they'll say, "But the Earth is 6,000 years old, and there's tons of evidence for it, and you're refusing to see it." And these scientists are lying about that, and they're lying about the evidence.
Yeah, there's a giant conspiracy where that 99% of scientists are in on.
Or
And
let me just
ridiculous.
atheists. So they're all atheists. So they're just looking.
That's right. God. And that really leads. I mean, there's another issue here. In terms of just education but in the ability to think critically and logically, because I have to say, I teach on a college campus, and yes, it's definitely true that college age kids now, I mean, there's no allegiance to Christianity or anything like that. I mean, that's dying very quickly among millennials and the next generation coming up for sure. But I have to say that their beliefs when it comes to things like that, spirituality, they're really not any better.
They don't critically think about that stuff.
No, their beliefs are, frankly, many of them are just ludicrous.
They're just making stuff up.
Oh yeah, and I mean, my goodness, I mean, there's like people, and don't get me wrong, there's people I love and care about who are friends and family of mine, and I'm thinking of one young lady in particular who believes in astrology. Okay, and she, every time she'll say something about it, she'll say, "I know you don't believe in it, but Aquarius this," or and the thing is that is an example of something that's easily proven wrong, actually. Okay,
that's a good point, because I talk to a lot more people, I think, about Anunnaki and lizard people and things like that. I hear about that from people my age group more than Christianity, I think. It's all these conspiracy theories.
It makes sense when you're shedding one religion, especially in the West and the modern U.S. We are shedding Christianity as a religion of our country, and so now we're searching.
Yes.
Because that void has always been there.
Carl Jung said something. I think it was Carl Jung said, "You can give a child." Or you can keep from a child all the knowledge of mythology, but you cannot keep the child from mythologizing. We will, in other words, that is something that is just ingrained in our very DNA.
Because it's looking for symbolism and allegory that explains the reality we live in that is not necessarily empirical, that you can't measure. So, but so the thing is on the campus just the other day, there was this woman there, a flat earther, preaching her gospel, and one of the things she said was that the Earth is flat and the sun is just local, and it's up here, and she claimed that it was only 9 miles above the surface.
9 miles.
9 miles,
small.
and
that's not even the.
And the thing is I discovered that's actually a common. Yeah, it's about 9 miles. Okay, but the thing that's bizarre about that.
What about planes?
Well, because I guess they only, I don't know what they believe about that. I know that they think there's a huge conspiracy there because planes,
right.
you
Yeah,
know,
that's true.
but,
Right.
So the thing is, but if the sun was only 9 miles above the earth, I mean, it just takes basic geometry to realize, well, if I'm standing right underneath it and it's right above my head, if it's only 9 miles high, well, my goodness, if I just travel 9 miles in any direction, its perspective in the sky should look as if it's at a 45-degree angle in the sky now.
Right. Yeah.
Any basic sixth grade geometry can you know, and it's like, well, why doesn't that happen then? If it's only 9 miles away, I can get in my car right now and I can within an hour drive 60 miles and it should look like it's way down on the horizon.
Right.
Why doesn't that happen? And it's just like, how did you get to the place where you believe something like that? I mean, have you given not one moment of critical thought to what you believe? You know, and so that's a real problem. And I think
confirmation bias. I mean, and this is what people really are so unguarded against.
Yeah.
They just will confirm their biases at all costs.
And we should probably
Like you
all
were talking
admit that we all have it.
Yes.
to some
Yeah,
extent.
we do.
Right.
We
In
all
fact,
have
we
it.
have a lot of them, and there's a number of books out recently and the best one I mentioned yesterday too. One of the best is called Thinking Slow and Fast by a guy named Daniel
I've read that.
Kahneman.
I've read that.
And he explains how many biases we have and how we literally make irrational decisions based on biases that we don't even know are there. But we can become aware of them. And the beauty is, the bad news is that humans do not think logically naturally. Most people think that when you say think logically, what they think you're saying is just like sort of like common sense on steroids. And in fact, the opposite is true. If you read that book, you know that common sense is in fact often the very thing that will lead you down the exact wrong road because you know, and you think it's true but it's not. And so learning understanding the foundations of logic and then learning how to think critically, we need to start pounding that into our kids in kindergarten.
Yeah.
Teaching them the difference between facts and opinion, because so they can grow up. Because the thing there is that when there's tons of what's disturbing to me is that millennials, they're no more, as I talk to them, they hold just as many ludicrous beliefs as my grandparents did, and they have the internet.
They're just different.
Right. So what they do with the internet is the internet's great. Here's the problem with the internet. Yeah, there's a lot of truth on there, but there's a lot of crap on there too. And when you take facts out of context, or your confirmation bias, you're just looking for what can I look for that confirms my belief. You know, you're gonna be just as screwed up and just as erroneous in your beliefs, even with all of that information. And
That's right. And this would be another great topic.
It would
We've got
be,
to wrap this
yeah.
up because
the effect of the internet over the last 10 years.
Well,
that's a great.
What I'm thinking is you know, if you just have information and you gain all kinds of knowledge, it would be right or wrong knowledge, but let's just say for example, it's all the right knowledge. Okay, even still, if you don't have what these wisdom traditions give us, then the guidance for that, it just seems like that could be a problem.
Well, that's where I was going. That's where I was thinking too. Is maybe that's the devil's advocate side. Critical thinking is important, but we also know that for some reason we need the mythologies. There's something about us. It seems.
But I know Chris is going to take issue with this, but maybe we could talk about this sometime. We're at an hour.
Chris is like, all right, that's enough, guys. You got to wrap it up. But.
It's just
plus Chris would want to have a mic for this.
You know, here's the thing: the very foundation of all knowledge, though, is going to be some form of observation, even if it's not empirical, and then that filtered through some system of reasoning.
Yes.
Everything that you believe will always be that. Okay, so if your ability to reason is not good, it doesn't matter what mythologies you have. It doesn't matter what facts, even true facts, you're presented with. If you're incapable of arriving at true conclusions based on, you know, premise 1, premise 2, premise 3, and now plug that into a logical argument that leads you to an inescapable conclusion, given that the premises are true, that is powerful. Yeah. And when you don't have the ability to do that, it's not going to matter what other information you have. And so that's why I think that's foundational.
And that has a lot to
In
do-
fact, Aquinas, was it Aquinas? Yeah.
No, we thought it was, and then I found out it wasn't. So I don't remember who
it was yeah, it was Thomas Aquinas, right? He once was quoted as saying, "Reason trumps everything."
Yeah, but it wasn't him. I don't. Anyway.
Yeah, but that statement is
that
actually
makes
true.
sense. Right.
Reason actually does trump everything.
And you have to be able to let go of your ego too.
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
Because ultimately, even if you can come to it from a reason perspective, you got to be able to say, I'm wrong, which
Which is something wisdom
is-
traditions speak to. So.
All right, you guys, shut up.
Good. All right.